April 1944. The sky was ours. Spring of 1944. I was a Hauptmann of the Luftwaffe, and I believed myself untouchable. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 was my sword, my pride, my proof of superiority. We ruled the air, or so we thought. I laughed at the clumsy silhouettes of American planes, those flying coffins of the P-40 and P-47. We called them scrap metal stitched with wings, loud, slow, and unworthy of a duel against a true German hunter. In those days, arrogance filled our lungs more than oxygen. We soared over France like gods of the air, our contrails carving lines of dominion across the blue. The Reich still breathed, though faintly, and every victory in the clouds fed the illusion that our cause remained immortal. I remember the taste of that illusion. Sharp, intoxicating, and dangerous. The command preached that our machines were perfection, that no American engineer could ever grasp the elegance of German steel. I believed them, because I wanted to. In the hangars near Rouen, pride was our uniform. We polished our planes with obsessive care, speaking of honor and precision, while the world burned below. Every morning, we gathered around the bulletin board to read the reports. The Eastern Front was collapsing. Stalingrad had fallen. Divisions were disappearing into the snow, but we ignored the truth. We told ourselves those battles were distant echoes, not warnings. Our war was above the clouds, pure and noble, or so we pretended. We mocked the Allied airmen who flew their heavy beasts into our territory. Cattle in the sky, Klaus, my wingman, would say, laughing as he pointed to a P-47 limping home across the horizon. They fight like tractors, and we laughed, all of us, blind to what was coming. None of us realized that every flight we took was one step closer to the edge of a new kind of war, one where courage would weigh more than speed. I felt untouchable, invincible, my Mi-109 purred under my hands, alive and loyal. I had downed more than 20 enemy aircraft by then, most of them British. The Americans were still new, untested, we thought. Their machines a mix of steel and mistakes. Yet deep inside, I sometimes wondered about them. Their formations were growing tighter, their attacks more coordinated. There was something in their flying, a sense of unity, of purpose, that didn't belong to machines, but to men. That thought haunted me as I looked at the dawn sky, the air heavy with the smell of oil and dust. Our radio crackled with orders, and the mechanic slapped the side of my cockpit. "Bring us glory, Herr Hauptmann," I nodded, hiding the unease that had begun to grow in me. When I took off, the wind was calm, the horizon clear. The clouds opened like a battlefield waiting for fate. I didn't know it yet, but soon, I would meet the so-called worst fighter of the United States, the one I had mocked so many times, and it would rewrite everything I believed about war, honor, and fear. That morning, as the sunlight hit my wings, I thought the sky still belonged to us. But in truth, it was already slipping away. May 1944. The Wolfsprei. The airfield in northern France smelled of fuel, sweat, and arrogance. Every man there carried himself like a predator who had already tasted victory. We strutted across the tarmac in our leather jackets, our Luftwaffe badges gleaming, as if the Reich still stood unshaken. We were the last wolves of a dying empire, too proud, too blind to see the rot beneath the steel. Inside the mess hall, the walls were lined with propaganda posters, the eagle of the Reich soaring above broken Allied wings. They meant to remind us who we were fighting for, but in truth, they were reminders of what we were pretending not to see. The Eastern Front was crumbling, the Atlantic bombings had turned German cities into ashes, and yet we laughed louder every day, as if laughter could drown out defeat. Our mornings began with ritual, coffee so strong it burned the tongue, followed by mechanical inspections, flight briefings, and jokes about the fat American birds. We spoke of air superiority, as though it were eternal, convinced that our Messerschmitts could dance circles around anything that flew with a white star on its wings. The officers fed our egos with words like honor and purity, and we swallowed them whole. Klaus was always the loudest in the hangar. He had painted a Wolf's jaw beneath his cockpit, a symbol of our squadron. "The Americans don't understand the hunt," he used to say. "They fly in packs because they're afraid to be alone." I laughed, because that's what was expected of me. But even then, I sensed that his words were more insecurity than confidence. There was something admirable, even unsettling, in the way those Americans fought together. The radio crackled every few hours with news from the front. More Allied bombers, More incursions over the channel. The command ordered us to intercept daily, sometimes twice a day. Our numbers thinned, our victories meant less. When one of us didn't return, the officers said nothing. We simply erased his name from the chalkboard and added another line of bravado to the evening's conversation. We had stopped fighting for victory, we were fighting to keep the illusion alive. One evening, as the sun fell over the hangars, I stood outside smoking and watching the silhouettes of our aircraft against the orange sky. The wind carried the distant thunder of artillery from the coast, proof that the war was moving closer. I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt since flight school. Doubt. Not fear of death, but of meaning. Was this what we had become? Hunters without purpose, circling the carcass of an empire that refused to admit it was dead. That night, I dreamt of the sky. Endless, quiet, untouched by flags or orders. And when dawn came and the engines began to roar again, I told myself it was just another mission, another chance to prove the Luftwaffe's pride. But somewhere deep inside, the Wolf had already begun to lose its teeth. June 1944. The first encounter. It was a pale morning over Caen when I first saw it, the American fighter we all ridiculed, the P-47 Thunderbolt. Its bulky frame shimmered in the haze, lumbering across the sky like a steel boulder with wings. I almost laughed when I spotted it through the canopy. An easy kill, I thought, pushing the throttle forward. The Messerschmitt's engine roared to life beneath me, the propeller slicing through the mist as I climbed for position. The P-47 looked absurd compared to the Mi-109's sleek shape, heavy, slow, and built like a tank. I had downed Spitfires, Hurricanes, and even a few Mustangs, but this thing seemed hardly worth the fuel. I banked hard, the G-forces pressing against my chest, and dove toward it from above. My guns were armed, and the world narrowed into that single crosshair framed by glass and adrenaline, but something unexpected happened. The Thunderbolt didn't break away, it didn't run. Any pilot with sense would have rolled out of my dive, but not him. Instead, he held his line, straight, steady, defiant. I saw the flash of sunlight on his canopy, the brief glint of movement inside, and then the glimmer of tracers cutting through the air toward me. The first burst missed, hissing past my left wing. The second one didn't. I felt the plane shudder, metal tearing, the sound of impact like stones against glass. My right aileron vibrated violently. I pulled hard, trying to regain control, climbing out of range. My heart pounded, not from fear but disbelief. How could that lumbering machine turn so quickly? How could it shoot with such precision? One leveled off at 3,000 meters, circling wide. The Thunderbolt was still there, calm and steady, moving through the smoke trails I'd left behind. Its engine growled like distant thunder. Deep, powerful, relentless. For a moment, it felt less like fighting another pilot and more like staring into something inevitable. I dove again, this time more cautious. The sky was clear, the clouds thin like silk stretched over fire. I squeezed the trigger, sending a spray of bullets that grazed his left wing. He rolled to avoid me, graceful, measured, and returned fire. The tracers cut across the air, orange streaks that looked almost beautiful before they tore through space toward me. Then I saw his face for the first time. Just a glimpse, a young man, maybe 20, jaw set, eyes locked forward. There was no rage there, no hatred, only focus. I pulled up, my engine screaming, smoke trailing from my wingtip. The battle lasted less than a minute, but it felt eternal. When I broke away and turned for base, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had looked into the future, a future where the worst fighter was flown by men who didn't care about reputation, only purpose. That morning, over the skies of Caen, I realized something terrifying. Courage doesn't need elegance, and freedom doesn't need perfection. June 1944. The sound of thunder. The next morning, the sky over Normandy trembled with distant echoes of war. Clouds hung low and heavy, stained gray by the smoke of burning fields. I climbed into my Messerschmitt with the same ritual calm, gloves, goggles, throttle. But something inside me had changed since Caen. I could still feel the vibrations from the Thunderbolt's guns in my bones. That sound, deep, rhythmic, unhurried, had followed me into my dreams. As I rose through the haze, the air shimmered with heat and gunpowder. The radio crackled with nervous chatter. Multiple bogies approaching from the west, my squadron spread into formation, a hunting pack once again, but my confidence was gone. I searched the horizon for that silhouette. Wide wings, blunt nose, defiant presence, and there it was. A group of P-47s, climbing in formation, their silver bodies flashing like lightning against the morning sun. They didn't dive recklessly, they moved together, deliberate, synchronized, each trusting the other completely. Klaus's voice broke through the static. Easy prey. Hans. Let's show them who owns the sky. He dove first. I followed, heart pounding, the Mi-109 cutting through the air like a blade. The gap closed in seconds. I lined one thunderbolt in my sights, squeezed the trigger, nothing but empty sky. He rolled, impossibly smooth for something that heavy, and I found myself chasing his vapor trail. Then it happened, the roar, that unmistakable growl of 8.50 caliber guns unleashing fury. The tracers came from below, and before I could react, a burst ripped through my left wing. My cockpit shook violently, the smell of burning oil filling my lungs. I pulled the stick hard, feeling the Mi-109 shudder, resisting. The thunderbolt passed beneath me, engine screaming like an animal unleashed. For a heartbeat, I saw the insignia, the white star on blue, sliding past my damaged wing. The worst fighter in the U.S. arsenal had just torn through German precision like it meant nothing. I managed to stabilize, limping toward the coast. Below, the fields of France blurred into chaos. Smoke, trenches, and flickering fire. My instruments blinked red. Oil pressure dropping. I was losing altitude fast. The radio called out, "Hans, report," but I said nothing. I was staring at the horizon, where another formation of thunderbolts was carving through the clouds, unstoppable. In that moment, I understood. I wasn't fighting machines anymore. I was fighting belief, and belief was something you couldn't outfly. June 1944. Smoke on the horizon. I landed the Mi-109 half-dead, dragging metal across the runway in a shower of sparks. The mechanics ran toward me shouting, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. My plane, my perfect German creation, was bleeding oil and coughing smoke. Klaus approached, grinning like it was a joke. "You let the fat American hit you," he laughed. Impossible, I forced a smile, but my hands still trembled on the flight stick. I knew what I'd seen. The thunderbolts weren't the clumsy beasts we imagined. They were disciplined, ruthless, united. The Americans flew like a brotherhood, covering each other, never alone. That was what made them dangerous. Inside the hangar, the air was thick with tension. Reports came in of more Allied incursions. The Normandy skies were filling with bombers, escorts, and waves of fighters we couldn't stop. Command told us to maintain dominance. The word sounded hollow. Dominance belonged to whoever still believed in something. That night, I sat outside near the runway, the horizon glowing orange. You could see the front from miles away, black columns of smoke rising like monuments to our arrogance. One of the younger pilots, barely 19, joined me. "They don't fight like us," he said softly. "They fight for each other." I didn't answer. Because he was right, our Luftwaffe squadrons had become fragmented. No coordination, no spirit, just survival. We flew for medals and propaganda. They flew for home. The next day, I walked through the barracks and saw it clearly for the first time, fear disguised as pride. Some of the boys still laughed, but their eyes darted to the ground. The thunderbolts were haunting us. Every mission meant fewer returns. Every victory was followed by silence at dinner. And then came the rumors. The new American fighter. Sleeker, faster, deadly. The P-51 Mustang. Our commanders called it a copy of the Messerschmitt, but the tone in their voices betrayed uncertainty. If the thunderbolt had humbled us, what would this new predator do? The sky over France no longer felt like home. It was turning into someone else's sky, a place where courage had changed sides. June 1944. The new enemy. When I first saw them, I knew the war had changed forever. The P-51 Mustangs appeared out of the sunrise like silver ghosts, fast, silent, almost beautiful. Their wings caught the dawn and threw it back in blinding flashes. The radio exploded with warnings. Enemy fighters at Angels 20. Multiple contacts. We clung to intercept, but they were already above us. That was their secret, altitude and speed. By the time you saw them, they were already behind you. The first attack came swift and surgical. Klaus and I turned into the climb, but they cut across us with impossible grace. One of them rolled inverted, dropped behind a Messerschmitt, and opened fire. In seconds, it was over. A burst of light, a trail of smoke, a name erased. Klaus cursed over the radio, his voice cracking. They move like falcons. He was right. The Mustangs didn't fight, they hunted. And yet, there was something almost noble in their flight. No cruelty, no mockery, only purpose. They were efficient, deadly, and strangely calm. When we returned to base, the officers called it an acceptable loss, but the truth was written across our faces. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe, was now bleeding out in its own sky. That night, Klaus sat beside me, silent for once. He cleaned his goggles slowly, the firelight flickering across his tired eyes. "They're not fighting the same war we are, Hans," he said finally. "We fight for pride. They fight for freedom." I didn't argue, because I had seen it too, in the way the Mustangs moved, in the precision of their strikes. They weren't chasing glory, they were building something beyond us. And as I stared at the stars above the French horizon, I felt it, the slow, sinking realization that our time in the sky was ending. The wolves had ruled long enough. Now, the falcons were taking over. July 1944, the friend who never returned. The morning began with fog over the fields near Rouen, a quiet veil that almost hid the reality of war. Klaus and I stood by our aircraft, the smell of fuel and damp earth clinging to the air. He grinned at me through the mist, helmet in hand, confident as always. "Today we show them," he said. His laughter echoed faintly, the kind that sounds brave until you realize it's a disguise for fear. Our orders were simple: intercept a formation of Allied bombers crossing toward Caen, escorted by Mustangs. We'd flown hundreds of such missions before. But that day, something in the air felt wrong, heavier, charged. I watched the mechanics step back as we powered our engines, the familiar whir filling the morning with metallic thunder. We climbed through the mist into a sky already alive with motion. The bombers appeared first, massive and relentless, blotting out the horizon. Then came the escorts, the P-51s, shimmering like blades of light. "Targets ahead," Klaus called out. His voice crackled with determination. The fight began like lightning. Tracers streaked across the blue, bursts of flak blooming in black clouds around the formation. Klaus dove first, slicing through the chaos with the precision of a hunter. I followed, heart pounding, every nerve alive. Then I saw it. 3 Mustangs breaking formation, diving toward us. Klaus pulled hard into a roll, outmaneuvering one, firing back at another. His gunfire found its mark, a quick flash, a burning wing, and a falling streak of silver. He laughed over the radio, triumphant, but triumph never lasts in the sky. The 3rd Mustang appeared from nowhere, faster than anything I ever seen. I shouted a warning, but it was too late. A flash of gunfire, a burst of smoke, and Klaus's voice vanished mid-sentence. His Mi-109 spiraled downward, a silent, spinning cross disappearing into the clouds below. I circled desperately, calling his name. Only static answered. For the first time, I felt the cold truth of our arrogance. We weren't gods of the air. We were mortals in metal shells, fragile and fleeting. When I landed, no one said a word. Klaus's locker stayed, untouched, his cup still on the table, a thin layer of dust beginning to form by evening. The laughter that once filled our hangar had turned into silence. That night, I sat beside his empty bunk, staring at the medal he'd earned for bravery. I realized how meaningless it looked now, a piece of polished metal for a man who would never see the sky again. I had lost my wingman, my brother, and with him, the last piece of faith I had in our cause. July 1944, the heart of the enemy. They found me a week later, broken, burned, and half-conscious, in the wreckage of a field outside Bayeux. My Messerschmitt had been torn apart by Mustang fire. I remembered the moment before impact, the smell of smoke, the sensation of falling, and then nothing but darkness. When I woke, I was surrounded not by Germans, but by Americans. Soldiers in olive uniforms stood over me, their faces worried but not cruel. I expected a rifle butt or a boot to the ribs, but instead, one of them offered me water. "You'll live," he said quietly. I couldn't tell if it was a blessing or a curse. They took me to a makeshift camp, a collection of tents near an airstrip freshly carved into French soil. To my surprise, they didn't treat me like an animal or a prize. I was a prisoner, yes, but not degraded. The medics patched my wounds, bandaged my arm, and gave me food. Their discipline wasn't harsh, it was human. A few days later, a shadow fell across my cot. I looked up and saw him, the pilot who had shot me down. I recognized him instantly from the markings on his jacket, a Thunderbolt insignia, bright against the khaki. He couldn't have been more than 20. He smiled, a calm, disarming smile, and said in slow German, "Good flight." German. His accent was clumsy, but the respect in his tone was unmistakable. I stared at him, unsure what to say. My hand trembled as I tried to salute. Out of habit, he simply nodded. "You fought well." Then he laughed, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. That moment broke something in me. I had been taught that our enemies were savages, machines of chaos. But this young man, this beau, had shown me more decency in a minute than my commanders had in years. From my cot, I watched their planes take off every morning. Thunderbolts, Mustangs, the same aircraft I once mocked, yet the men who flew them worked with laughter, jokes, and camaraderie. Their officers walked among them like equals. It was a different world. I began to understand that courage wasn't born from obedience. It was born from belief in something greater than fear, greater than pride. July 1944. The American hangar. They moved me to a larger base outside Cherbourg, a place buzzing with life. The first thing I noticed was the noise, not the harsh barking of orders, but the hum of work, conversation, and laughter. Mechanics swarmed around planes, hands black with grease, singing as they tightened bolts and patched bullet holes. It was chaos, but it was alive. One of the guards, a kind-faced sergeant from Illinois, explained that this was how they always worked, fast and free. He said, "No overseers, no shouting." Everyone knew what had to be done, and they did it. To me, it was almost unimaginable. In the Luftwaffe, every task was dictated, every mistake punished. Here, the pilots and mechanics spoke as friends. I saw the Thunderbolts up close, the machines I'd once ridiculed. Their metal skins bore scratches, burns, and bullet marks, yet they stood proud, ready for flight. Each nose carried a name painted in bold letters: Miss Texas, Liberty Bell, Hope. It shocked me. Our aircraft bore numbers and emblems of command. These bore pieces of their pilots' hearts. I watched one crew repaint the nose of a damaged plane. The pilot, barely older than a beau, joked as he worked, his laughter echoing through the hangar. There was no hatred in their faces, no need for revenge. Only a sense of duty, driven by something I couldn't yet name. At night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of their laughter carried through the camp like distant music. It reminded me of the life I had forgotten existed before the Reich, before we traded humanity for pride. One evening, the young American who had downed me walked by again. "You'll see," he said softly, noticing my stare at the planes, "it's not the aircraft that win wars. It's the people who believe they should." Those words stayed with me, because for the first time, I began to believe he might be right. August 1944. The stars on the fuselage. The longer I stayed in that American base, the more the world I once knew seemed like a faded dream. Days blended into one another, the hum of engines, the smell of fuel, the laughter echoing through the hangars. It was a strange kind of captivity. I was a prisoner. Yes, but also an observer, standing at the edge of something I had never understood. Every aircraft there told a story. On their wings were scars from battle, patched and repainted like badges of survival. But it was their fuselages that truly caught my eye. Each bore a name, hand-painted in bright colors: Lucky Lady, Miss Texas, Eagle's Cry, Hope. I couldn't look away. They weren't just machines, they were memories, promises, fragments of lives waiting beyond the ocean. We Germans had flown under numbers, ranks, and insignias, symbols of a regime that demanded obedience over individuality. But here, the planes carried human names. The pilots treated them not as tools of death, but as companions, reflections of the people they missed, or the ideals they fought for. It unsettled me at first, then, it humbled me. One afternoon, I watched as a group of mechanics repaired a Thunderbolt riddled with bullet holes. The pilot stood nearby, smoking, his hand resting on the wing. "She brought me home again," he said, half smiling. His crew laughed, tapping the dented armor as if it were a living thing. "She always does." I wondered if that was what faith truly looked like, not in flags or commands, but in loyalty and trust between men and their machines, between comrades and dreams. The young pilot who had downed me, James, visited often. His English was fast and warm. My replies were clumsy but improving. He spoke about his hometown in Tennessee, about his wife, and about a child he hadn't yet met. "They keep me flying," he said one day, pointing to the small name painted on his P-47. "Hope." He let me walk with him across the airstrip. The wine carried the scent of oil and wildflowers, a strange mixture of war and life. He showed me how his crew worked, how every man relied on the other. "It's not about the medals," he said. "It's about getting each other home." That night, I sat alone near the edge of the field, staring at the line of aircraft resting under the stars. Their painted names glowed faintly under the moonlight, a constellation of belief scattered across metal wings. For the first time since the war began, I felt something unfamiliar, not pride, not anger, but peace. These men didn't fly to dominate the skies. They flew to protect the ground beneath them, the homes, the families, the freedom they longed to return to. And as I looked up, I realized that the stars above and the stars on their fuselages weren't so different. Both represented something I had forgotten how to believe in: hope. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The dawn of June 6 arrived like no other morning I had ever known. Even as a prisoner, I could feel the air vibrating, not with the calm hum of routine patrols, but with a storm of engines so vast it shook the earth itself. I stepped outside my tent, the chill of dawn clinging to my skin, and looked to the horizon. The sky was alive. It was as if the heavens had split open. Hundreds, no, thousands, of aircraft filled the air in every direction, layered like clouds of steel. Bombers, transports, fighters, their engines roared in unison, an endless tide of sound. The ground trembled with their passage. Above the Normandy coast, the sky itself had taken sides. Even the American soldiers around me fell silent. Some watched in awe, others whispered prayers. I recognized the silhouettes instantly: the Thunderbolts, the Mustangs, the C-47s towing gliders packed with men. The flying coffins, we once called them, now they were angels of liberation. From the camp, I could see faint flashes over the coastline. The bombardment had begun. Columns of smoke rose from the beaches like black fingers clawing toward the clouds. The sound was deafening, a deep, continuous growl that seemed to come from the earth itself. I felt it in my chest, in my bones, in every scar the war had given me. A sergeant passed by, his helmet tilted, eyes fixed on the sky. "This is it," he muttered. "We're taking it back." I wanted to ask, taking what back, but I already knew. It wasn't just land. It was the soul of Europe, the freedom we had crushed beneath our boots. And now, those who still believed in it had come to reclaim it, ours past. The air filled with the smell of oil and salt, and the distant thunder never ceased. I watched wave after wave of aircraft vanish into the horizon, only to be replaced by more. For every one that fell burning, two more took its place. It wasn't power. It was will, an unstoppable, human will. By noon, the news had reached the camp. Allied troops had landed on the beaches of Normandy. The invasion had begun. The men around me cheered, their shouts echoing through the fields. I, too, felt something rise inside me. Not joy, not sorrow, but awe. The war I thought belonged to us had become something greater, something beyond borders and empires. That night, the sky glowed faintly with distant fires. I sat outside the barracks, listening to the fading rumble of engines crossing the stars. And I realized something that chilled me to the core. The roar I had mocked, the sound of those American engines, was no longer just a nose of war. It was the sound of freedom returning to the world. July 1944, the captain from Memphis. It was a quiet evening when I met him, the man who would leave a mark deeper than any bullet I had ever faced. His name was Captain James Turner, from Memphis, Tennessee. I had seen him before, walking between the rows of Thunderbolts with a certain calm authority, the kind that didn't need to shout to be obeyed. His men respected him not because they feared him, but because they believed in him. He approached me one evening while I was sitting near the hangar, watching the sunset fade into the haze of smoke and dust. "You were Luftwaffe?" he asked, his tone neither accusatory nor mocking. I nodded. "Then you know what it means to love the sky," he said. His words caught me off guard, not for what they meant, but for how gently he spoke them. We talked for hours that first night. He told me about his life before the war, a mechanic's son, married young, with a baby boy born just weeks before he shipped out. "He'll be walking by now," he said softly, staring at the horizon. "That's what keeps me flying, not glory. Just the thought that maybe he'll grow up in a world where no one tells him what to think." I didn't know how to answer. The Luftwaffe had taught us to fly for honor, for the fatherland, for the machine that claimed to protect us, but never for something as fragile and pure as a child's future. His words felt foreign, almost dangerous, yet they rang with a truth I couldn't deny. James invited me to walk with him to the flight line. The air smelled of fuel and dead grass, and the last light of day glimmered off the polished wings of the Thunderbolts. "You know," he said, patting one of the planes, "this thing's a beast. Heavy, slow to climb, but she's steady. She gets us home." He looked at me then, his expression serious. "I don't fight for medals or for orders. I fight so no one can ever own another man's sky again." Those words pierced through me like shrapnel, because for the first time, I realized what had truly enslaved us in the Reich. Not our enemies, but our obedience. We had let others define what was right, what was honorable, what was worth dying for. James's freedom wasn't in his flag, it was in his conviction. As the night deepened, I watched him climb into his aircraft, preparing for another mission. He turned, gave a small salute, and smiled. "You'll see, German. The sky belongs to everyone." Then he vanished into the dark, his engine roaring like a storm. Long after he disappeared, I stood there listening to the fading echo of his thunderbolt, feeling something I hadn't felt in years: admiration. For the first time, I understood that courage wasn't blind loyalty. It was the strength to fight for what should never be taken from another man: freedom. August 1944, the sound of forgiveness. James returned from every mission with the same quiet grace, never boasting, never angry, always carrying that unshakable calm that seemed to shield him from the madness of war. Sometimes, after nightfall, he would let me accompany him to the edge of the airfield. There, beneath the dim light of lanterns, I would watch him tend to his aircraft as though it were a living thing. The Thunderbolt gleamed even under layers of dust and grime, its metal skin scarred but proud. I remember the first time he let me touch it. The surface was still warm from the engine's heat, humming faintly, as if the machine itself was breathing. "Feel that," he said. "That's life, not death." The smell of oil mixed with the sweetness of summer grass. The moment felt impossibly human amid a world built on destruction. He handed me a rag, nodding toward the nose of the plane. "You can help, if you like." I cleaned the metal, tracing the bullet holes and patches of burnt paint. Each mark told a story: battles fought, near escapes, friends lost. And as my fingers moved over the cold steel, I began to realize something I had never seen before. These machines were not weapons to them. They were vessels of survival, tools of hope, not conquest. James watched me in silence. Then, softly, he said, "The plane doesn't make you strong. What you believe in does." Those words settled deep inside me, heavier than any lecture I had ever heard from a German officer. I thought of class, of all the men who had died believing strength was born from obedience. And now, here stood my former enemy, teaching me that true power came from faith in mercy, not dominance. One evening, I heard that James's squadron would be flying over Germany. I wanted to warn him of the flak, of the traps, of how ruthless our defenses had become. But he just smiled. "We all take the same risk up there," he said. "The difference is what we take it for." When he took off, I watched his thunderbolt vanish into the dusk, leaving only the fading echo of that deep, steady engine, the same sound that had once haunted my nightmares. Now it brought something different. It was no longer the sound of defeat, but of forgiveness. Later that night, as the base slept, I walked back to his plane's empty spot on the runway. The scent of burnt oil still hung in the air. I placed my hand on the concrete, where its wheels had rested, whispering a prayer I didn't know I remembered how to say. For the first time since the war began, I wasn't thinking about sides or victories. Only about the strange truth I had learned from my enemy, that even in war, a man could still choose to be human. September 1944, the skies of liberation. From the camp's perimeter, I could see the sky over France changing color, not just with the sun, but with victory. Day after day, the formations of a light aircraft filled a horizon, their engines thundering like the heartbeat of a new world being born. Where once I saw arrogance in their flight, now I saw purpose. The Luftwaffe, my pride, my identity, was disappearing, swallowed by the same sky we once claimed as our throne. I would stand there for hours, watching them pass overhead. Mustangs, Thunderbolts, bombers heavy with resolve. They no longer looked like enemies. They were the carriers of something greater, the return of freedom to a continent that had forgotten what it felt like. Every roar of their engines carried a message: the Reich is dying. The guards didn't bother stopping me from watching anymore. Perhaps they saw that I wasn't looking for escape, but for understanding. And from that vantage, I began to see my homeland not as a victim of war, but as the architect of its own destruction. Reports filtered into the camp every few days: Paris liberated, German lines collapsing, Allied forces pushing east. I heard the words, but it was the sky that told the real story. The contrails stretched, unbroken toward Germany. White scars etched across the blue, marking the path of liberation. Sometimes I would close my eyes and imagine Klaus flying beside me again, his laughter carried on the wind. But in this vision, we weren't hunters anymore. We were witnesses to ghosts watching a new era unfold. James came to me less often now. His missions were longer, his eyes heavier. Yet whenever he returned, he still smiled, that same steady, human smile that reminded me why he fought. One evening, he found me standing at the fence, staring toward the east. "You'll see it soon," he said. "The end." "I don't know what that means anymore," I reply. He looked toward the fading horizon. "It means peace, if we're lucky." Then he added quietly, "and justice, if the world remembers what it cost to earn it." That night, the camp was silent except for the distant rumble of engines, a sound I once loved, then hated, and now could finally listen to without fear. The Allied planes moved like silver arrows beneath the stars, sweeping toward Germany. They weren't conquering, they were cleansing. And as I watched them fade into the darkness, I felt something shift deep inside me. The pride that once burned in my chest had turned to ash. But in its place grew something unfamiliar, fragile, and real: relief. The Luftwaffe was finished. The Reich was collapsing. But somewhere, beyond all the ruin, I could sense the sky healing, the same sky that had watched us fall, now opening its arms to freedom once more. For the first time, I no longer wished to fly for a flag. I only wished to fly for peace. April 1945. The collapse. By spring, the air over Europe had lost its rhythm. The once constant hum of engines from the Luftwaffe was gone, replaced by the steady drone of Allied aircraft sweeping freely across the skies. Even as a prisoner, I could feel the weight of it. The war no longer raged, it was unraveling. Every message that reached the camp carried the same tone: cities gone, armies shattered, orders growing more desperate by the hour. I still remember the last time I heard the voice of Gring over a captured radio. His words were hollow thunder, calls for sacrifice, for final victory, but no one believed anymore. Our faith had died long before our empire did. The Reich was nothing but a whisper screaming into the wind. The guards allowed us to listen to the broadcasts now. There was no reason not to. The truth was breaking faster than any wall could contain it. Hamburg was burning. Dresden was ashes. Berlin was surrounded. Every name I knew had turned into a place of ghosts. Sometimes, I would stand outside the barracks at dusk, watching the endless streams of Mustangs and Thunderbolts heading east. Their engines roared with certainty, cutting across the last pieces of a dying world. I should have hated that sound, but instead, I found comfort in it. It meant the madness was ending. One night, a captured German mechanic in the camp told me that our command had ordered even the youngest cadets, boys barely 16, to take to the skies. "They call them the Wunderkinder," he said bitterly. Children saving an empire of bones. The thought sickened me. I had once been proud to wear that uniform. Now it felt like a brand. I thought of Klaus, of his grin before takeoff, of how proud we both were to fight for something we never truly understood. He was lucky, I realized. He had died believing. The rest of us had to live long enough to see the truth. The Allies advanced faster each day. The air raids no longer met resistance. There were no more intercepts, no more duels, only retreat and silence. When the American officers in the camp received word of another captured city, their celebrations were quiet, almost reverent. Even victory seemed too fragile to celebrate loudly. That night, James found me again by the fence. His uniform was worn, his eyes darker than before. "It's almost over," he said softly. "Yes," I answered, watching the orange glow of another burning horizon. "But it feels like the world is ending." He shook his head. "No. It's being reborn." I turned my gaze upward. The sky was streaked with faint trails of light, Allied bombers returning home, their wings gleaming in the moonlight. For years, I had called that sight defeat, but now, I understood. It was not the death of my world I was witnessing, it was its salvation. May 1945, the fall of Berlin. The news reached us at dawn. Berlin had fallen. The city that once stood as the iron heart of the Reich was now nothing more than rubble beneath Allied boots. I sat on the edge of my cot, listening to the radio's faint voice crackle through static. Surrender here, retreat there, silence everywhere else. The empire that promised 1,000 years had died before it reached 12. I tried to picture it, the streets where I once marched in parades, now buried under dust and flame. The proud banners torn, the buildings hollowed out, the smell of smoke clinging to everything. But what struck me most wasn't the destruction, it was the silence. For the first time since the war began, Berlin was quiet. The nose of hate had finally burned itself out. In the camp, no one cheered. Even the Americans moved softly that day, their laughter subdued. War had taken something from everyone. Victory didn't feel like triumph, just survival. A few hours later, one of the guards handed me a newspaper. The headline was bold, almost too large to believe. "Germany surrenders." Beneath it, a photo, Allied soldiers shaking hands amid the ruins, civilians watching in disbelief. I stared at it for a long time. Those men were smiling, but their eyes carried exhaustion I knew too well. As the day wore on, the airfield came alive again. American transports landed constantly, bringing supplies, medics, and officers. I watched as crates of food were unloaded: bread, canned meat, chocolate. The same soldiers who had once fought to the death against us were now feeding the people we had starved. That image seared into me deeper than any battle ever had. Later, James found me near the hangars, his uniform stained with oil and dust. "It's done," he said simply. I nodded, unable to speak. He looked east, toward where Berlin once stood, unbroken. "We'll help them rebuild," he continued. "Even your people. Nobody wins if hatred survives." His words left me hollow. I wanted to thank him, to apologize, to explain, but no language could bridge what we had lived through. Instead, I followed his gaze toward the horizon. The smoke rising in the distance looked like ghosts ascending. That night, the Americans played music through the loudspeakers, jazz, lively and bright. Some of the soldiers danced, laughing beneath the stars. I stayed outside my barracks, listening. For the first time, I didn't hear chaos or defiance in those notes. I heard life returning. Somewhere far away, my country was in ruins. But the sound of those trumpets carried a strange peace, a rhythm of forgiveness, faint but real. And as I looked up, I realized that the skies once owned by empires now belonged to no one. The war was over. The sky, at last, was free. June 1945. The last flight. Weeks after Germany's surrender, the war felt like a ghost that still lingered in the air. The camp had changed. Barbed wire no longer meant prison, and guards had become companions. Most of the German prisoners were quiet now, lost in thought, waiting to be sent home to whatever remained of their cities and families. But for me, home had become a question with no answer. One morning, James approached me with a different kind of offer. "Command wants to test a few captured planes," he said. "They're letting some of your pilots fly again, under supervision." I looked at him, half in disbelief. I hadn't touched a cockpit since the day I fell from the sky. "They want me to fly?" I asked. He smiled. "No. I want you to fly. That afternoon, we stood side by side on the airfield. The engines of several P-51 Mustangs purred in the sunlight, their silver skins gleaming like mirrors. I had seen them only as predators before. Fast, lethal, merciless. But now, as I stepped closer, I saw something else: balance, beauty, freedom. James handed me a helmet and said quietly, "She's steady. Respect her, and she take care of you." I climbed into the cockpit with trembling hands. The seat felt foreign yet familiar, the instruments simpler, the view wider. As the engine started, a deep vibration ran through the frame, through my bones, through memories I thought I'd buried. The propeller blurred into a silver halo, and for the first time since the war began, I didn't feel like a weapon. I felt like a man again. James signaled from the tower. I eased the throttle forward, the Mustang rolled, gathered speed, and then, with a single breath, I was airborne. The earth fell away beneath me, replaced by endless blue. The wind roared past the canopy, and I laughed, a sound I hadn't made in years. I climbed higher, the fields shrinking into green patches, the rivers glinting like silver threads. Below me stretched a land broken but alive. Smoke still rose from the distance, but so did sunlight. The war was gone from the sky. For an hour, I flew without purpose, without rank, without fear. I performed gentle rolls, tested the controls, and listened to the soft hum of peace. This plane, once my enemy, moved like it was part of me. The controls obeyed my hands as though they had been waiting all along for forgiveness. When I landed, James was waiting, grinning beneath his cap. "How did it feel?" he asked. I removed my helmet slowly, still breathless. "It felt," I said, searching for words, "like flying for the first time." He nodded. "Then maybe now you understand what we were fighting for." I looked back at the Mustang, sunlight glinting off its wings. I did understand. Up there, above borders and banners, I had touched something pure, not victory, not pride, but freedom itself. August 1946, the sky that belongs to everyone. A year had passed since the end of the war, yet the echoes of it still lingered, in the empty villages, in the faces of those rebuilding, in the quiet that had replaced the roar of engines. I lived now in a small house near the Rhine, where the fields stretched wide and unscarred. Sometimes, when the wind was right, I could almost forget the sound of gunfire and hear only the whisper of the sky. I often found myself looking upward. Old habits die slowly, especially those learned in the clouds. But now, when I saw planes tracing their paths above, I no longer tried to guess whose insignia they bore. The sky had finally returned to what it was always meant to be, a place beyond nations, beyond pride, beyond war. The Allies had let me remain in Germany, working as a mechanic for a reconstruction program. I repaired engines, not for fighters or bombers, but for transport aircraft carrying food and medicine. Every bolt I turned, every panel I straightened, felt like a quiet redemption. Metal that once carried death now carried life. One afternoon, I received a letter. The handwriting was firm, steady, American. It was from James Turner. He wrote from Memphis, where he had returned to his wife and son. He told me about the boy, how he was learning to fly, how he loved the sound of engines just as his father had. At the end, James had written one line that I read again and again: "The sky forgives faster than men do." I hope you've learned to forgive yourself. I sat by the window for hours after that, watching clouds drift lazily across the horizon. I thought of class, of the men who never came home, of the arrogance that had blinded us all. We believed we owned the heavens, that power could make us eternal. But the sky, in its silence, had always belonged to everyone, and to no one. Sometimes children from the nearby village came to watch the planes take off from the new airfield. Their laughter carried through the open fields, pure and untarnished. I envied them. They would grow up under a different sky, one no longer divided by emblems or hatred. As the sun sank, painting the clouds gold, I stepped outside and tilted my head back. The wind brushed against my face, soft and familiar. I closed my eyes and felt the faint hum of engines somewhere far above, distant, peaceful, human. The war had taught me many things, but none greater than this: courage has no flag, and freedom has no enemy. I was once proud to serve the Reich, then ashamed to survive it. Now, I serve only memory, and the sky that unites us all. The worst fighter I had once mocked had not defeated me in battle, it had saved me from who I was. And as I watched the horizon fade into twilight, I knew at last what it meant to be free.